Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I'm Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to go follow us on all of our socials at Around the 412 and go subscribe to us on YouTube as well. This week, we have a special guest. Joining us is the radio play-by-play announcer for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Josh Getzoff. Josh, thank you for the time. We really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. I hear Smitty, the nickname, so you already have the hockey lingo down. So appreciate being on with you guys.
Love it. Yeah, you know what? I should have told you this before you came on, but in a text to Tyler, like when we finally were able to nail down a date and time, I said Getzy was good to come on Tuesday at 7:45.
That's what they call me behind the scenes. That's what they call me.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
there you go.
It just, it's natural with hockey. It's either the Y or the IE, or you get just an S added to the end sometimes, but you know how it goes. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I didn't know if Tyler was going to respond to me and be like, "Why are we having Ryan Getzlaf on the show?" But he knew exactly what I meant. So
Sure.
we've had Steve Mears on the show before. It only made sense to finally get you on here as well. And what a week to do it. Week of the draft, obviously. We also have free agency looming. But first, let's talk about you before we get into some hockey stuff, just your career in general. But I want to take it even a step further, just coming up, growing up. Let's go all the way back to your background. How did you even get into hockey? Was broadcasting something you've always wanted to do? Or when did that become what you had your eyes set on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, when you go all the way back for me, it really is something that I've wanted to do I'm 34 now. It's probably been the last 20 plus years of my life that it's something that I've wanted to do and wanted to be involved in. I mean, I think like a lot of us, I grew up playing sports. I played hockey. I played baseball probably more than any other sport. And I realized when I was like 12 years old in hockey, and a lot of my friends, including Eric Tangradi, who I grew up with, were getting chosen to select teams and play in tournaments. And I was like, yeah, man, you're doing great, but maybe you should stay back here and not travel with the team. I was like, oh, okay, this is probably not something I'm going to end up doing as a full-time job, like playing in the NHL or anything close to it. So I started to get involved in sports media. And by that, I mean, I would just read the paper and I would write my own fake stories based off what I read in the paper. And then I started to realize that I could broadcast too. I mean, it was kind of like you'd realize different realms of what it was like to be in sports without actually playing the sport. And to me, then that became my interest. I mean, I still was, playing the sports. I was still involved. I played college hockey up until the end of my sophomore year. But, in the back of my mind, I always knew it was more of a hobby than a career path. So I would say, really, when I was like 12, 13, I started to get involved in just reading, writing, watching a lot of different anchors, a lot of different broadcasters, a lot of different writers, just seeing how they handled themselves. And unknowingly at the time, kind of absorbing it. And then that took me forward. I started a sports broadcast club with two of my best friends from high school. Ironically enough, the three of us are all still in the industry. My one friend, Steve Watson, is now the Dan Potash, essentially, for the Milwaukee Brewers on their broadcasts. And then my other friend, Alex Cohen, is the play-by-play for the Iowa Cubs, the AAA affiliate of the Chicago Cubs. So they both have interest in what's going on in Pittsburgh, but on the baseball side. So I can't really help them there. And then I went to Ithaca College, studied there, got into broadcasting really heavily there. And then that kind of took me on my path to starting in Elmira, New York, a small town about 30 minutes outside of Ithaca. Went from there to Champaign, Illinois. And then that led me to Pittsburgh in 2015, and this year will be my 9th year already with the Penguins coming up. So,
yeah, wait, you know what? Actually, let's talk about that right there, because your first season in Pittsburgh, was that the first of the back-to-back cups in 15, 16, or was that the year previous?
Yeah, that was so my first year I came in, it was a whirlwind. Like I got hired on probably the beginning, I think it was like the first week of September, I actually got hired. And the way that my job had worked in my previous employers, I was under contract until September 30th, and they wouldn't let me out of that job. So the Penguins were cool with it. Like they said, we'll let you come the end of your contract. Problem was, you know how it works with hockey. I mean, look at the schedule this year in the preseason. You show up in first week of October, there's a few preseason games already done, training camps halfway over. Like a lot of that meet and greet aspect of the preseason is way in the rearview mirror. So I kind of was thrown into it. I mean, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved every second of it, but I didn't necessarily have the benefit of, looking around, getting to know my surroundings. It was kind of just like, I'm here, here's what I'm doing. And, the season was off and running, and obviously had a rocky start, but a really awesome finish. And ever since then, it's just been kind of go. But I've loved every second of it.
Josh, stay with me here for a second, because you're not going to like the way that this starts out. But
Okay.
your first season in Pittsburgh, they won the Cup. So hear me out on this.
Okay.
The Penguins fire you and then rehire you.
I know what you're saying. So like, here's the thing. Do we say like maybe that I just like miss a paycheck and then like that's being fired, and then all of a sudden the next week it shows up? Okay. You're rehired.
If that works out, then that could be good.
Yeah. Hey.
All right. Well, in that case, like, I'm back now. That was it.
There we go. There it is. No, all jokes aside, I mentioned to Tyler that I was going to say that before, because we were doing research. We were like, was his first season the year that they won the Cup? Is that what we need to do, is hire Josh Getzoff in order to win the Cup? So actually what it should do, if we do that, theoretically, is they should win the next two.
Right. Exactly. I mean, no pressure, Kyle Dubas, figure it out. But it's funny, like Colby Armstrong that year, he started to break into the broadcast side, and we know what he's done since. I mean, he's a star, and deservedly so. He's really like, I remember saying it to him when we first started working together. I was like, you got to stick with this, man. You are really a natural. You have the charisma. You're funny. You know the game. You're going to go really far. And I mean, it's been amazing, and it's been really cool to watch him. But we were really linked together that first year, because I did the pre and post a lot with him, especially in the playoffs. And, we just kind of grew friends together that year. We became really close, and we're still obviously really close now. But it was kind of cool because we came in at the same time, and he obviously was not a part of those Cup teams, especially in 2009, as he'll be the first to tell you. But he also kind of had the opportunity, because of what he was doing in 16 and 17, that we were there. He was able to be a part of it. Guys like Sid, who knew him, Tanger, Flower, they brought him into the mix. And I think that was a really cool experience for him too. Because, players, I think sometimes you win, but you're not on the team. That player instinct is, well, I shouldn't be celebrating. I didn't earn this. And those guys, they were like, hey, you were a part of the formative years of the X generation and all this kind of stuff. And this is our opportunity to see it all come full circle. So just as an aside, that was kind of a cool part of those 2 years, to be right there with Colby while he got to have those kind of moments also.
Yeah.
What was it like so we had Rusty on here a couple years ago, and we were able to talk to him about, in kind of similar situation, where his career with like actually being at the NHL level, he wins back-to-back Cups immediately. But from like a media perspective, what's it like to come into an organization and you're at the high of highs for your first couple years, and there's no downtime. Immediately you're with a team that's winning back-to-back Cups. Like, from a media perspective, what is that like?
This is no slight on anyone in the journalism industry that's working around the Penguins, and there are some unbelievable people who cover them on a daily basis, but it's pretty easy, honestly, because everything's good. There's no bad things. You have your great moments, you have your great memories throughout the playoff run. The storylines kind of write themselves as the games go along, and it's a happy ending. You win. And no one's going to get fired when people part ways, like we've seen in Washington with Barry Trotz, but no one gets fired when you win the Stanley Cup. No one, is banished away when you win the Stanley Cup. Everyone's a hero. You're celebrated as such. So I think those first couple years, easy is maybe the wrong word, but they were nice to work in, I guess, conducive to a fun work environment would be the best way to say it, those first couple of years. But what you quickly realize, especially this year, I think it really hammered it home, is those are long runs. Like, when you go on and win the Stanley Cup, I mean, think about it. Vegas finished, a week ago this past Tuesday? Or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. That's a long journey that begins in mid-September and ends sometime in mid to late June. And you've seen some of the injuries that have come out since. Like, it shows how hard it is to win it, but it also shows how hard it is to do it again. Colorado obviously couldn't do it this year, but I think that speaks volumes about what the Penguins especially were able to do. I know Tampa kind of did it in 2.5 years with the COVID situation, but the Penguins especially were able to do. So I think when you look at it, just kind of going back to your original question, it gives you so much of an appreciation for how hard it is when you see these kind of years where it doesn't go your way, and where there is a lot of drama, and when there is a lot of bad. as far as the results are concerned. It gives you just that appreciation for how great things can be when you're at the top.
I don't want to keep jumping around, but you said something, kind of talking about your journey, and you have two friends that are still working in the industry that caught my ear. And you were saying you three like started a club essentially. Like I want to just know more about that, because is that okay? So Tyler and I are 28. And so, like mid 90s babies, right? But like late 80s, early 90s, was that club what you would say, like maybe what we're doing now? Like instead of a podcast, you guys were doing something like that?
Somewhat, but it was still in high school. So we were like, basically it was, I'm trying to think of how I describe it. Like we were essentially 3 kids that expanded to like 10 kids that were kind of interested in maybe getting into broadcasting. We had the little JVC camcorder you would get from Best Buy, and 2 of those little mics you'd finagle into the side. And that's how we would do it. I mean, we did football, we did basketball, but on just like a small little tripod moving back and forth at the top of the scaffolding. And I think that was like, it was fun for us. It was like, oh my God, this is cool. We're calling games. Like we're having this experience. Never expecting that it would amount to anything more than just a fun hobby when we were in high school, but it ended up being something we all put on our resumes. I would say maybe helped us on our college searches, just having that kind of thing, as far as a background is concerned. And for me, it was really the first time where I was like, I kind of like doing this. Like this is really fun for me, and this is enjoyable, and I like the preparation, and I like the feeling you get when you're calling it. And that's just kind of extrapolated over the years since. But that's really an early moment where it kind of, I guess, the light bulb went on for me in that situation.
So it was almost like a launching pad, if you will. I mean, that
in a
really
way.
seemed, that was really cool. Go ahead, Tyler.
What was hockey always your favorite sport to call, or did you have other sports that you really liked calling as well?
Hockey was always my favorite sport, I would say. I think calling it just kind of came a little bit naturally because I played it for so long. And I mean, granted, I didn't play at the highest level, but I did play, like I mentioned, 2 years college. I mean, I played varsity, I played AAA growing up and stuff like that. So I was playing with pretty high energy players and high level capable players. So I think just that ability to call a game and have the anticipation in the back of my mind helps. But it's always been my number one love. Like I when I was really little, was always into hockey. It was the thing that I wanted to be a part of. So I just feel really fortunate that it's kind of taken me to where I am now. But you also look at the game, and I was just read a book, Justin Bourne's book, who's on Hockey Night in Canada and Sportsnet and hosts a show with Nick Kyprios. And it's a good book. I recommend it. But it talks a lot about his battle with alcoholism and working his way through that and doing some stuff on the broadcast front. But one of the things that he says is you don't realize until you take a step back how much the game of hockey has given you. And I think about that now and like what it's given me over the last, essentially decade of my life. Like it's an amazing sport, and the people are incredible that you work with in there, and just the experiences that you get to have. I've been fortunate, like you guys mentioned, that I've been there for 2 Stanley Cups. But it's just a cool community of people who really have a similar kind of passion about the sport, and people would call it a niche sport maybe, but to me it's just the greatest sport in the world, and the people around it are the best, and I feel really fortunate that I get to work in it.
Is that book by Justin Bourne an audiobook?
That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure about that, but are you a big audiobook guy?
I can't read. No, I'm just kidding. I just want to say I would definitely enjoy it more if it was an audiobook.
I'll be honest, when you said you can't read, I felt bad that I laughed initially first. So.
But it's coming. I got to ask you about Mike Lange. Obviously, like I feel like every time that you make an appearance anywhere, that's probably a question that you have to answer. But we haven't gotten to have a conversation about him yet. So, what has he meant to your career? From the time that you got there, obviously, to having the opportunity to take over that seat. What has he meant to you?
Everything, in a word. But I would say also, I mentioned that whirlwind I had when I came in for training camp in 2015. One of my most vivid memories from that was Tom McMillan, who's since retired, was the Penguins vice president of communications. And he's, one of the days that I got there, one of the first few days when they were in the middle of training camp, he's like, hey, listen, I'm going to take you around the locker room. I want you to meet the players because these are the guys you'll be working with all year. And it's time to start building relationships because you kind of missed out on the first couple of weeks when you'd be doing that. So he's taking me around. I say hi to everybody. And then as I'm kind of doing my wrap around the room, Mike Lange and Phil Bourque come walking in. And he's like, oh, you got to meet these guys. They're going to be the ones you're working with the most and everything. And, I shake their hands, say hi to them. And I still remember Mikey looking at me and he's like, how old are you? I was like, 27. And he grabbed my shoulder. He's like, that's how old I was when I came to Pittsburgh. And I've said this before, but in the moment I was kind of like, that's awesome. Mike Lange, this is so cool. Talking to me and acting like he's excited to meet me. But then I think about it in the development we've had since then, in the relationship we've had. And I almost wonder if maybe there was an early sign for him in that moment, hey, maybe this is the guy, that when I'm ready, he's stepping in now at a young age. He's hungry. He's ready to go. Maybe this is the guy that one day is going to take my spot and take over my chair. And, obviously we saw things happen, but I mean, he was incredible throughout that whole situation. Obviously he had to step back just travel wise. I think it was in 2018. And he was the first person. I still remember talking to him in the bowels of PPG Paints Arena. And he's like, listen to me, you're ready for this. You're ready to go in there. You're ready to do these games. He's like, I have full confidence in you. And I've said this before too. When he said that stuff to me, no offense to the fans out there, but I didn't really care what anybody thought how I was doing. Because he thought I was doing all right and he thought I was worthy of being in there. That was all that mattered to me. So I've kind of taken that belief that he's had in me and taken it to the next level of just doing it full time. And it's been a blast. And we still keep in touch. I mean, he's sending, I don't know if you guys have heard the stories, but he sends me texts, me and Borky texts all the time during games. If we're getting a little too excited about something, he gives us a text to say, settle down. He tells me to reel Borky in. He's like, cast the fish hook, Josh, and reel him back in, reel him back into the booth.
He was probably having a field day then with that Gino goal to take that won the game against the Caps, where there's
he loved
iconic,
it.
Yeah.
He loved that. So he, one thing about Mikey is, if you remember back when he was calling games at really his peak, when he was doing every game and he had just that pop when he was calling it, he had an ability to make big moments seem bigger than they actually were because he could develop that in his voice. And that to me is one of the greatest things about him. He has his Langisms and they're legendary. He has his goal calls and they're legendary, but his ability to anticipate and feel something coming for a guy that had never played hockey, never been on the ice himself, and just watched it, to me was uncanny and second to none. And I've tried to take a lot of the ways that he would develop his voice in situations into my call and put my spin on it in certain situations. But to your point about that GoPro video, he was loving it because he said, I think that's what you're referring to, right? With that video
it is.
of me and
Yeah.
Borky?
Borky's yeah.
He was he said, I remember him saying, he texted me, he said, this is what people hope that you guys look like in this kind of a moment. They hope that you're having that much fun and that much energy because that's what you guys felt. When that goal was scored, you're you go from just the absolute depths of despair of blowing a 3-0 lead on home ice to Washington to scoring with whatever was 80 seconds left. And you win at the time, what felt like the game that finally got them over the hump. We know how things played out, but it was a cool moment. And he, like I said, he's still very much in contact with me and Phil and texts us pretty often. Actually, I was just texting with him yesterday. He's still a very, very important person, in the day-to-day broadcast life for all of us.
I also think he made it easier for people to accept you taking over his chair, because I just doing research before this, I just searched your name and was going through some articles and stuff. And there was one where he was basically giving you that acknowledgement, saying that this guy is ready to take over. And when you make that statement to the fans right off the bat, I think it was easier for people to accept the transition thanks to him.
I agree. And I'm thankful for him for doing that. And he didn't have to do that. I mean, he didn't even have to take a liking to me. He could have just been like, this guy's doing the pregame, postgame. I'm calling the games. I don't have any real interaction with him in game, but it wasn't like that. We sat with each other a lot. One of the great things that I was able to do, and the Penguins gave me the ability to do, was travel during the playoffs, the 2 years that they won the cup and I was doing the pregame and postgame. And because of that, I spent a lot of time with him. Like, we would sit together during the morning skates. We would spend time together after the game. We would, walk together on the off days and talk about things. And you really develop a relationship. I mean, you get your rapport with your broadcast brethren and your partner. Like, Phil and I are really close friends off the air, and we actually just golfed together last week. And we hang out and that kind of stuff when we're on the road and not in the broadcast booth. And that's really where those relationships are built, and where you see it come to life when you're on the air. Because you can tell when people genuinely like each other, and you can also tell when people are just working with each other. And there's nothing wrong with the working side, but to have that personal relationship and that real belief in one another that you're going to get the job done. I feel like, those years where I was with Mike and Phil, we really felt like all of us could really bring something to the table every single broadcast. And we felt, and I still feel, that our radio broadcast is second to none and brings a level that is not matched. So it's a fun atmosphere that we've created, and it's a fun broadcast that we've created. And Mike Lange kind of set the tone and the bar that will continuously strive to be reached, but probably never touched in the years to come.
I think it's probably like this within every market. I mean, you need to have these people to be able to do it on the radio side. But at least for me, obviously, this is the only one that I really see. And I'm not even like a big person for listening to games on the radio. But if I'm going to, they better be able to paint the picture as if I am watching it. And I think that you guys do a great job of doing so. And obviously, I don't have, the ability to compare you guys to other markets or anything like that. But I think that's what makes you so great at your job, is the ability to, even though you are listening to the game, be able to visualize it because of the way that it's being called.
Yeah, I think that comes with time too. I mean, I'll admit, it's funny. I'll listen back to some of my first couple games, and it doesn't even sound like the same person, with just the verbiage that I use now, the tone, the cadence. More of the confidence I have, I guess, in calling a game now than I did 5 years ago. But that's normal, right? Like in any job, the more reps you get, the more opportunities you get, the better you hope you will get at it, and the more comfortable you will definitely get at it.
Yeah, Josh, I don't know if you want to go back and listen to our first podcast. I don't know if you want to do it.
Yeah, I'll have to log back and go check it out after this. Then I'll give you guys a scathing review. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that's normal, right? Like anything you do, the more you do it, the better you get at it. It sounds cliche, but it's so true, like repetition. And in hockey, you get 82 cracks. Like, that's my feeling with radio. You get 82 cracks. Why would you not give 1,000% 82 times and hope that you get a little bit more games as a reward afterwards? So that's how I operate, and I don't know any other way when it comes to calling them.
Right.
Yeah, just keeping with Mike Lange for a sec, I'm just curious. He has so many iconic calls, and you mentioned the Langeisms. Do you have a personal favorite of his, whether it's a goal call or a Langeism itself?
Yeah, getting the bingo, or getting the fast lane grandma, the bingo game is ready to roll, is probably my favorite, because it was a really unique situation where I actually saw him say that in San Jose. When they won the cup, I knew that it was getting close, and I wanted to hear what he was going to say. And I could see he had, if this was his desk right here, he had a little Post-it note right here that his hand was over. And I was like, that's it. That's what he's going to say. So I'm watching the ice, but also watching him. And the way San Jose's building works is there's an elevator shaft directly behind the broadcast booths that takes you right down to the ice level. So I had to do the post-game interviews afterwards, but I was like, I'm not missing this call. I want to hear what he has to say. And it's obviously muffled because you're standing behind them, and they have their headsets on, and they didn't even know I was there. But I just, right when it ends, I just hear him go it's over, get in the fast lane, grandma, the bingo game's ready to roll. And I was like, oh, that was awesome. And then I just sprinted onto the elevator and went downstairs. So that one probably, when I hear it, brings back the best memory. I've always loved, when he speaks about a goaltender, like whoever you throw in a last name in there just lost his liquor license. For some reason, that's always made me laugh. I don't know. I've always liked that one. So those are probably my two favorite ones.
Did you ever tell him afterwards about you being behind him for that Stanley Cup final call?
No, but the funny thing is, I've told that story a couple times, but never to him and Phil. So if they've heard it indirectly from me. I've never actually said, hey, during the most important time of the season, I was just heavily breathing and standing behind you guys watching the ice and waiting for the final seconds to tick down. But yeah, no, that was definitely a cool moment. And when I think back on that particular line of his, that's the memory that comes up.
Yeah.
What's that like for you for say like a game's in like overtime? Do you have like things that you're thinking of if the Penguins are going to win in overtime, or that they win in a certain fashion that you're like thinking of how to call this goal specifically, or does that just come more on the fly?
It's a little bit of both. Like, I think that you can get into a real dangerous situation if you try to plan out what you're going to say too much, especially with hockey. I can't speak to other sports, but, it's just football seems a lot of times like there is more breathing room to actually, obviously plays happen at full speed, but when the guy's in the end zone for the touchdown, there's a little bit more room to kind of, sell what just happened. Baseball, obviously, there's a ton of time. But with hockey, I feel like a lot of it's so reactionary that I try to, in particular moments, have a little something, like, because I feel like there's a line you have to walk between totally off the cuff and reactionary and somewhat prepared. Like, for example, Sid's 500th goal 2 years ago against Philly, I had something ready for that. Sid's 1,500 point this year, I had something ready for it. I just didn't know how it was going to happen. So you got to be careful that it's not something that just sounds strange, because those moments live on. And I believe in my role, like, there is a lot of pressure in those moments to do them justice for guys like Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin or Chris Letang, or even, Drew O'Connor when he scored his first goal last season in the NHL. Like, you want to make sure those moments are justified for these guys that put in the work and you get to know on a personal level and cheer for, to have that moment. So I would say, in overtime, I've done the one, the lock the doors, turn out the lights, Penguins win in overtime. Like, that was kind of something that I just came up with on my own. And I use it not as much as I used to, because I started to feel, to the point that I said earlier, that sometimes it felt forced and I felt like I didn't need to be saying it on certain goals. I'll break it out every once in a while, but not all the time. But what I started to do a lot this year is I just kind of leaned into moments and didn't necessarily have a whole thought process written out or anything like that. And I felt like as a result, I was able to do some of my best work in those moments. So I'm not saying that will be the direction I go forever, but I've also been really lucky that I've walked into a situation where I'm calling games when Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, like, these guys are all hitting significant milestones. They're all at not the back nine of their careers, but they're in situations where a lot of these milestones that most players never touch are reachable for them. Like, Gino's no injury preceding him is going to hit 500 goals this year. Like, these are things that I think about because they're very important. Chris Letang obviously missed a lot of time last year, but still got to that 1,000th game. And those are big moments, and they're important to me because, like I said, you get to know these guys and you cheer for them, and then to be a small part of those moments is really special.
Well, I asked you about Mike Lange and your favorite call of his. Do you have one of yours that you would say like sticks out that was pretty good?
I
know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean that GoPro one this year ended up being pretty good, and that was just totally reactionary. I would say one of the ones that I've always loved is one of the ones is actually one of the ones I was calling my first year. And you'll listen, I didn't really have total control of my voice like I do now, in the sense that I kind of still sound like I'm in puberty. But when Sid walked Dylan Strome in Edmonton and then backhanded it in that 6-5 crazy game the first time him and McDavid matched up, that one was a fun game. I mean, obviously just from the goal scoring perspective, but also being able to call that was one that sticks out to me. Gino's shootout winner this year, on his 1,000th game against Calgary. That was a fun one. There's been a few, but those ones just off the top of my head pop out. I'm sure there's more that I can't think of right now, but those are some of the ones. And generally, it's the guys who are the big names that scoring those goals because they're at big moments. And oh, you know what? Gino's triple overtime goal against New York last year in the first round in Game 1. That one was. That was 2 games in one. So that was a marathon, and there was a lot going on in that game. So that one probably sticks out for sure.
I'm gonna have to go back and actually listen to what your call was on that one, because I don't even know if I've heard that, to be honest.
That was a one, like I said to you guys, I didn't have anything planned at that point because you're in triple overtime. You're just trying to make sure you don't miss a goal at that point. But yeah, I think I said slap it on the Broadway marquee when he scores, and that kind of got some traction. Unfortunately, they didn't win the series, but I will say that game 7 in overtime, I've said this before, I had something ready if they would have won that game 7 in overtime, but it died that night. So
yeah.
yeah.
All right, let's transition here and talk real quickly just a little bit about Kyle Dubas taking over.
Sure.
What have been your first impressions? Obviously, you were able to be there for that first press conference, and he since had the pre-draft media availability. So a couple different times being able to talk to him and listen to him speak. What have been your first impressions of Kyle Dubas, and do you think he is the guy?
So my first impressions were, let me go back. Before they hired him, I didn't feel one way or another. I think we all knew Fenway really liked him. Like whether you were in the know or not, he just seemed to fit the mold of what Fenway Sports Group wants their executives to be. So I think that there was a natural ability that those two potentially would become connected should he be available. And then we all know how that played out. I didn't really have a feeling one way or the other. Like I'm not one of those guys that's like, oh, I'm not into analytics. I'm just a hockey guy. Like I'm a whatever wins guy. That's kind of the way that I look at it. And the Kyle Dubas, yes, Toronto didn't break through until this year, but you look at the records. I mean, they were top 5 in the NHL for his entire tenure in Toronto. It's a different roster that he has here. There's no question about that. But I'll say from those 2 press conferences, he's won me over with what he said and what he's sold. But as he said himself last Friday before the awards and the draft tomorrow night, it changes when you don't win. You can have a lot of stuff and a lot of plan and a lot of idea, but when you don't win in this kind of a situation, the whole scope of you and the whole perspective of what you're doing shifts. Now, with that being said, I'm giving him full opportunity to put his stamp on this roster before I have any kind of opinion on what he can do, because he needs to do a lot of work. Let's be real here. Like, I've said this to a few people. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, I'd keep this guy, I'd keep that guy. I'm like, listen, I love these guys. I'm with them all the time. But if you're looking at this from a genuinely just unbiased perspective, this team did not make the playoffs. So how is anybody justified in returning in their current role next year, aside from the ones who we know the obvious and were not the problems last year? You know what I'm talking about. I don't need to name names, but like, I look at this roster and that's how I look at it. Like, I don't think that anybody in particular, aside from the obvious ones, was a reason that they could have gotten into the playoffs. In fact, they maybe were reasons that they did not get into the playoffs. So I think Kyle Dubas has been pretty straightforward in saying he's got $21 million to work with. You could probably shave a couple million off that when he inevitably, in my opinion, qualifies Ryan Poehling and Drew O'Connor. I think that's a no-brainer to bring those 2 guys back. And so then you're working with a little over 19 million, and you got to figure out how to fill your roster. And I think it's really interesting, guys, because he could take a lot of root here. Like I asked him point blank in our press conference last Friday, what characteristic he's looking for in players that he's looking to add this summer. And he used a really peculiar word to me, and he said talent. And like, you think NHL players, like, of course they're talented, but his reasoning was, you look at Sidney Crosby and what Evgeny Malkin and Ricard Raquel and Jason Zucker, like those guys, they had monster years last year. But then beyond that, there wasn't a whole lot of talent and production in the Penguins lineup. So it'll be interesting what that translates to as far as a fairly weak free agent crop, but a pretty heavy trade market, as we've seen. I mean, even just before you and I got on, there's trades happening left and right across the NHL. Yeah. So I'm going to be interested to see what he does. I'd be surprised if over the next week the Penguins roster doesn't have some dramatically new faces on it, because it has to. And it's his job now. It's his roster. He's got to put his stamp on it.
That's a good point. Do you feel, you mentioned, talking about the guys that did have good seasons, really the only one out of the free agent group that I want to bring up, Jason Zucker, between him, Brian Dumoulin, Tristan Jarry, 3 key unrestricted free agents of theirs. Do you feel one way about any of those 3 in terms of the potential to return to this team?
The one that I feel the most strongly about, as far as just the one way or the other, is Jarry. Because I think, where are we at? You and I are speaking here on the 27th. Free agency starts on the 1st. In my opinion, maybe you guys disagree. If that guy is a UFA come noon or 3 p.m., whatever it is, on July 1st, someone's signing him. Like, I cannot imagine he's coming back and renegotiating with the Penguins. So to me, it's going to be pretty cut and dry. If he's here, he will have been signed within the next 3 or 4 days. If he's not signed by then, to me, he's not coming back. And then the answer obviously then becomes, who do you sign? Who do you bring in? What's the move there? So that's why I think that one's the most interesting. The most unfortunate is probably Zucker, because we're all anticipating that he's going to want his last long-term contract as a 31-year-old, and well-deserved if he gets it. But I just don't think it makes sense for the Penguins when Kyle Dubas has blatantly come out and said, we want to get younger. We want to get, just a younger overall roster. His kind of 31-year-old to a 3, 4, 5-year deal doesn't exactly go in the way of what he's saying right there. So, and I say that as a guy that has been one of Jason Zucker's biggest supporters when he was dealing with all of his injuries and calling him a wild card year after year. And it's been unfortunate to see him not be able to necessarily get that fair shake health-wise. And then we finally saw it this year, and everyone loves him, and he's been amazing. But in the process, he may have priced himself out. And that's just the unfortunate thing about all this, is that he may not be back next year. But, if the cards align and that guy's willing to take a 2-year deal, then I say go for it. But I don't blame him if he's looking for 5x5 or more.
Yeah,
because he should be, and he'll get it too. He'll get it from somebody.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at the way that 6-year deals have just kind of been thrown out there in the last few seasons.
Right.
But I was just speaking of that. You look at his age and the term that he could get and stuff like that. Not that I don't love Brian Rust. I mean, we mentioned that he's been on the show before, but the only caveat that I would say with Zucker is if you didn't have that contract already for, a 30-year-old with his term and cap hit, maybe you could justify the Jason Zucker one with something similar. But yeah, I can't give another long-term deal to a 30-plus-year-old.
For sure. And I agree with you on that, actually, 100%. I just always look back and it's like, okay, so when Russ signed that contract, Zucker had not had this season.
Yep.
That's what it really comes down to.
Oh, yeah. I got the benefit of 2020 hindsight right now.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I agree with you, Zach, like 100%. Like, but if Zucker had the year he had this year, the previous year, then I think we're all kind of scratching our heads at the Russ term and the Russ contract, because I agree with you. But it made sense in the time because you just didn't know what you were going to get with Jason Zucker, unfortunately.
Yeah. And also, we're talking about this after Rust has a year with just like,
yeah, right,
terrible finishing for whatever reason. He just, the finishing just totally, I mean, the entire team, their finishing numbers were down this year. I mean, I know you could look on the surface and see the goal total for Jake Gensel being relatively similar, but that's adding 7 empty netters. Like even at 5v5, he was down a little bit. So, it'll be interesting to see if he can, get back to his normal level too. But okay, let's talk draft. Obviously, we were mentioning a little bit beforehand. This is a good year to have a very rare middle of the first round pick for the Pittsburgh Penguins, picking at number 14. We never see this. And in a really strong draft, the Pittsburgh Penguins won that 14th pick. Let's just get this out of the way first and foremost, because I don't want to get old takes exposed here and say that there's no chance that they're going to move that pick, but we feel pretty good about them making a pick, right? Like not trading that asset for a player or anything like that, because there's obviously been some talk about like, oh, Connor Hellebuck said that he wasn't signing an extension. Could the Penguins trade the 14th overall pick plus for Connor Hellebuck? We think the Penguins are making a pick tomorrow night, right?
Yeah, I think they're making a pick tomorrow night. I think they're making the pick at 14 tomorrow night. I mean, Kyle Dubas didn't rule out possibly even trading back, which that wouldn't surprise me either. If they feel like there's a guy they can get later and maybe pick up another draft pick in moving that 14th pick to move a little later in the first round. The one thing he did say, and Ron Hextall said the same thing, was he didn't want to move their first, and he didn't want to move a top prospect like an Owen Pickering. I mean, the reality is there's two things here, guys, like in my opinion. You need to add some prospects, whether you're contending now or not. And you can't miss on this pick.
Yeah.
No pressure, obviously. But this has to be, and we're doing a draft show tomorrow night on ESPN Radio in Pittsburgh. Paul Staggerwald and I are going to host that. And we were talking about it today, just kind of previewing some stuff that we're going to, get in order for that show. And to me, this is a big pick because you don't have a whole lot in the prospect pool. And if you're going to add a substantial piece, I'm not saying that 14th overall pick, Kyle even said it himself a couple of days ago, is not going to be in the lineup maybe for 2 seasons. But if he's somebody who can be in the lineup and somebody who can be a top 6 forward or a top 4 defenseman, then that would be huge for this organization, because if you look at their prospect pool right now, Owen Pickering's still a bit of a wild card. He's a good player, but he needs to fill out. He needs to learn the pro game. He just had kind of a sniff last year with Wilkes-Barre Scranton at the end of the season. But then who's your next best prospect? Valtteri Puustinen, right? And that's no offense to Valtteri Puustinen, who's led the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins in scoring each of the last 2 years. But, I mean, you got to start to build a little bit more there. So my hope is that pick is somebody who we can get excited about, not, within reason, right? We're not talking about a franchise changer like a Bedard or a Fantilli or anything like that. But we're talking about a player who you could look back and say, hey, in 2018, Philadelphia picked Joel Farabee in that 14th spot. In 2016, Boston picked Charlie McAvoy in that 14th spot. There have been some great players that have been selected there. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. You just got to make it count.
And maybe that player shares a first name with me, and his last name's Benson. I mean, that'd be great.
The Winnipeg,
that's my guy. That's my guy.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, listen, the last couple mocks that I've read, can I call you Smitty? Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Gets me.
Well, there we go. We're on now. the last couple mocks I've read, actually one of them had Zach Benson going to the Penguins. So that's interesting. I mean, I tend to lean towards the best available, like whether it is a defenseman, whether it is a forward. I think that they can't really be picky here, especially knowing, like I said, that this guy's not going to be in your lineup next season unless something dramatic happens. By dramatic, I mean like Mishkov falls to 14, which is not going to happen. Or maybe it does. Hey, who knows? It's hard for me to believe Washington would pass him at 8 with the connections.
That's the one.
There. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the one fun thing to watch tomorrow night. Like, it really sounds like, based on what we've heard, right, that it's obviously Bedard, who, by the way, making his NHL debut in Pittsburgh on opening night. That's kind of cool.
On ESPN?
On ESPN, yeah. And then you'll have Fantilli probably going to Anaheim, which I think is a great pick by the Ducks. And it sounds like this Leo Carlsson's going to go to Columbus, because Jarmo Kekalainen's been talking about drafting a franchise-changing center. And after Fantilli, Carlsson's the next logical one. And then after that's where it sounds like it's going to get really tricky, because I've heard Will Smith with San Jose, and then Montreal. Who knows? They seem to like to have the flair for the dramatic in those early picks. So who knows? And then you got Philly coming in at 7 and Washington at 8. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. But we'll all be glued to it. And I mean, I think the Penguins are going to get a good player. Like, that's just the reality. They're going to get a good player. They just need to make sure that they hit. It has to hit. Like, it cannot be something in 2 or 3 years from now that we're like, whatever happened to this guy? Like, it's got to hit.
I think with how good this draft class is, at least within that first 20, 25-ish, they're going to get a player that should go in like the top 7 or 8 in most years at 14.
I agree with you. Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
I mean, looked at it.
This defenseman everyone likes, the Swedish guy ASP. I'm not 100% tuned up with his name yet, just because I haven't had to be, but I will be if I need to be. I like this kid Matthew Wood from UConn. He seems to check a lot of boxes. Benson,
he's a Sullivan system guy. Like, Matthew Wood would make a ton of sense if they took him. I think a lot of people would be like, he wasn't really in, like, going in this spot in a lot of mocks that I read. Perfect fit in Sullivan's system. Obviously not for 2 years probably, but
right. Yeah, and I mean, I think then Benson is another guy that I also have read a lot about, and seems like if he's there, it'd be a no-brainer. Like, Dubas probably should sprint to the podium.
I got to look at Dubas's track record in terms of in Toronto and draft. If he's willing to draft smaller guys, he absolutely would be the pick if he fell to 14. I just don't know how he feels about size, because that's what's going to turn teams off if they don't take him.
Yeah, no, you're right. I agree. And that's also, like, let's be honest, no one's going to say it, but that's the only thing in the back of people's minds about Connor Bedard, right? Is like, he's a little small, like, and Fantilli's a man-child. So, like, there's a big disparity between the two of them. But I agree with you. And I think if I remember correctly, Kyle Dubas picked Nick Robertson, right? Jason's brother in Toronto.
Yep.
He's a smaller guy. And I think he picked him early second round or late first round. So there is some kind of, not necessarily that's his type as far as picking guys, but he hasn't shied away from it in the past.
good pull, actually. Like I said, I still would have to go through and just try to see if there's some historical tendency, but he didn't even come to mind. Actually, somebody texted me a couple days ago and said that should be a player that the Penguins target if, the Leafs were looking to move on from him. Yeah, he's 5'9", 160.
Yeah, he's a smaller guy. I mean, I think that there are a lot of those Toronto guys. Like, would you be upset if Michael Bunting was a top 6 winger for the Penguins next year?
So it makes a ton of sense. Or like,
Right?
Kerfoot or David
right.
Camp for the bottom 6. Yeah, there's so many guys on that roster that makes sense.
The bottom line is, like, whether people, and I'm one of them, you like to laugh at the Leafs sometimes for their lack of success, but they had a pretty darn good team this year. Like, I remember when they came into Pittsburgh, I was like, holy smokes, these guys they're good. Like, they're really good. They're deep, they're fast, they're big. And he built that team. So I think
it's never the roster. It's just they have the opposite of a horseshoe. They'll just find a way to lose.
They also had several years of playing Boston as well, and then playing Tampa, and Austin Matthews' first year playing Washington when they won the cup. Like they ran into a lot of really good teams too.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's about the path, right? Like someone I was just reading about, who was it? Patrick Marleau just got hired to some development program position with the Sharks, and they were talking about his run with the Sharks, and I'm like, man, those years, San Jose just ran into all those other teams. Like, they finally broke through that one year and played the Penguins. But all those years, like Western Conference Final, they lose to the Blues. Like, they lose to Nashville. They lose to, off the top of my head, LA. They lose to Chicago. Like, they had great teams. They just never broke through. And Toronto might be one of those teams that's a victim of that. Like, they had these great teams, and they finally got past Tampa. But after Tampa had gone to the distance 3 straight seasons. So, I mean, it's a great team that they built there, and his fingerprints are all over. I mean, he was there for 5 years. 5 years is what they say is a pretty good gauge on seeing how you design a roster, and that was a darn good team. Like, they were top 5 in the NHL. So,
yeah, absolutely. Tyler, do you have any other questions? Because I have one more before we make him do this outro for us.
So speaking, since we're still in the realm of like free agency and draft, Smitty and I kind of did this with the Steelers draft, and we asked each other the question. I'm kind of put you on the spot. We mentioned some guys in the NHL draft. So I'll open it up to more of a trade free agency question. But if there's one guy who is a free agent or you can make a trade for that just feels like he's going to be a Penguin, who would it be?
Well, if you would have asked me this at this time on, what day is today? Tuesday. If you would have asked me this at this time, maybe a couple hours earlier last night, I would have not even hesitated, and I would have said Tyler Bertuzzi. Would love to see him here.
Ooh.
But now, after that Taylor Hall trade in Boston, I pretty much think he's re-signing there, and that's kind of just what that was paving the way for. So I'm going to move away from that, and I would say, that's a good question. Good question. Can I call you Weeksy, or is that taken away from Kevin Weeks' name?
You can call me Weeksy. I do actually have a Y nickname that is going to sound really weird. Has nothing to do with my name. It's actually Beefy. Okay. It's a childhood nickname.
Beefy?
So,
all right.
Yeah. You want to call me that?
Okay.
Go ahead. But
that's like, people whose last name is Campbell, they call him Soupy. So, like, you can be Beefy. But okay, let's see. That's I like Bunting. I really do. I think he fits a lot. If I'm looking for guys deeper in the lineup, I know he was a Capital and we didn't like him, but man, I'd love Garnet Hathaway on our team. I would love Garnet Hathaway in our bottom 6. And I also
sandpaper.
Right? And I also, if I'm just going to throw one more name out there, been heavy on this guy's train for a while, and especially if you're going to let Brian Dumoulin go, which might happen, I would say is likely to happen. Now New Jersey goes out and gets Tyler Toffoli. They got to still re-sign Timo Meier. If I'm Kyle Dubas, I'm like, hey, Ryan Graves, why don't you just come right over here and we'll plot you right next to Chris Letang on our top pair, and you can just be 6'5" and kill people. So that I think is a good idea too. So those are some of the guys that I'm crossing my fingers for. I think, the other side of it is 31 other teams want to sign him too, right? So like you just have to hope that it works out for us.
I love the Ryan Graves idea. I mean, it's been put out there. Our friend who's been on here a few times, Hunter Hodes, actually mentioned that idea. Perfect replacements to go in that top pairing with Chris Letang. So you got me.
He's only 28, I believe. Yeah, so you could sign him 5-6 years. He's there for the rest of Letang's career at least. Could be good. You never know.
Okay, yeah, the last thing I wanted to ask you, we've kind of already danced around this question, I feel like, without actually asking it. What was your first pinch me moment? Like, I'm here.
Whew, that's a good question. First pinch me moment.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. There was a lot that first year because it was such a whirlwind. Um, probably just that beginning of March that year. I don't know if you guys remember, but like that was the year when they really started to roll. Like
Yeah.
HBK came alive. They started to run and just basically that was the first time in my life where I've been around a group of people where every single person knew that they were going to win the cup, but nobody said it out loud. Like everyone knew. Anyone who had watched hockey, even though I hadn't been around the team until that year, like you kind of just looked at each other and you're like, this team's like, this might
Even
happen.
when they had to come back against Tampa in the Eastern Conference Final, like I never felt like they were going to lose.
Right. Yeah, right. It just seemed like it was going to happen. It seemed like they had the team that was going to do it. And I don't know if I felt as strongly the next year, to be completely honest with you, but I think that was my kind of aha moment of, wow, I'm working this, I'm living this every day. This team is really good. This team has a chance to be really special. And this is awesome. So that probably was the time where it really clicked. And that was also probably the time when rhythmically I started to find a place, like as far as what I did on a game day, getting myself ready to be, ready to broadcast every night and just have a bit of a method and a rhythm to that too.
It's funny. You mentioned that the earlier when you're talking about the Sharks, the teams that they were running into in those playoff runs in that 2016, the Stanley Cup final, I don't think it mattered who the Penguins would have played. And it was unfortunate for the Sharks. They were just going to buzzsaw through anybody that they met in the Stanley Cup final. At that point, we've said this too, and the 2016 team, I don't think it mattered what team they played. They were just too fast, too dominant, and they had several lines that could score up and down the lineup. It was just, it was a night and day, like a way different team than anybody else could put on the ice.
Yeah, and do you guys remember the first? I think it was like the first 5 minutes of Game 1. Like the Sharks looked like they were in quicksand, and I remember watching that up top and being like, they might sweep them. This is a total mismatch. They look unbelievable, and I think they went up 2 or 3-0 in that game. And then the Sharks ended up tying it, and then the Bonino goal and all that stuff. But you look back, and you're right, Tyler. Like that was an unbelievable team. It was a really well constructed team for having been a first round knockout the year prior in 5 games, to turning it around, making the right moves. The Trevor Daley for Rob Scuderi move is like all-timer. Justin Schultz move for the whatever it was, the 6th round pick or 3rd round pick. Marino was the 6th round pick. Yeah. Awesome trade. Carl Hagelin for David Perron straight up. Perron's obviously carved out a nice career and has won a cup, but at that time, Hagelin was the player you wanted.
Perron would have been good in Pittsburgh had he not been here the same time as the coach that was here before Sullivan, I think.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's
Bad
a good
system.
point. I agree with that. Yeah.
Do you have a Stanley Cup or a ring, a Stanley Cup championship ring?
I do. I have 2, actually. They were nice enough. Mario Lemieux and Ron Burkle were nice enough to give all the employees rings the years that they won. So I have 2 that I very rarely break out, but I do have them. Yep.
That's cool.
I know where they are too, which is half the battle.
Well, our last question was 2 questions ago. Also, Josh, you've given us much more time than I said that you were going to be on here for, so I greatly appreciate that. But this has been awesome. I think we both walked out of this with a greater appreciation for who's behind that voice that we're always hearing. I also want to just commend you, and you're going to appreciate the fact that I'm about to say that you are a relatively young person still, and already are able to just take in everything and appreciate what you're doing in the moment. Because most people, once it's long gone, they can appreciate it, but actually being able to live within the moment is something that's special. And I think that you do a great job of doing so. So, Josh, it's been a pleasure to have you on. And like I said, I want you to take a second and then give us a little bit of an outro so I can clip it and then continue to use that in the future. So
you got it. So we're talking, this is around the 412. Is it just around the 412 podcast or around the 412?
Don't even have to say podcast. Just say Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Smitty and Tyler. Okay.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Give the neck crack, which doesn't crack. All right, 3, 2, and 1. It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler. I'm Josh Getzoff.
There it is.
Man, I got chills.
Let's go.
I got goosebumps right now. If I had a better camera, you'd see them. All right, but seriously, Josh, we can't thank you enough for joining us. I hope you enjoy the draft experience. Obviously, free agency's going to be kicking off too. Would love to stay in touch and be able to have more conversations about the Penguins.
For sure.
But yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It was a blast. I'm glad we got to do this, and I agree. If you want to do this again down the line, you know where to find me, and I'm always happy to talk Penguins. So look forward to it.
Absolutely. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right. And with that being said, thanks again to Josh joining. We'll be right back to talk some Buccos baseball. Stay tuned. That was awesome. Big shout out to Josh Getzoff, the voice of the Penguins.
Yeah, huge thank you to him for coming on. We got a lot of information about his background. You learned a lot about him himself, but then a lot about the Penguins and his insight from somebody that's actually in the room with the Kyle Dubas and the rest of the organization. So that's a really cool insight. And yeah, I'd love to have him back on. That's really awesome. And the fact that he had his club in high school, the broadcasting club.
That was my favorite part of the conversation, I think.
Yeah, and then they had their own camera and we're just calling games on their own. And I'm assuming they were like his high school sports games. That's pretty sick, honestly. But yeah, that was a great conversation. So thanks to
He's
Josh,
one of those dudes that you can just wind up and let go. I mean, we would ask him a question and I would be watching because, let you guys behind the fourth wall a little bit here. When you're recording the show in StreamYard, it gives you like a running time of how long the show has been going. I would be watching and he would just talk for like 3 minutes, 4 minutes straight at times answering questions. So, yeah.
And honestly, that's probably for the best because I know that you guys would rather hear him than us. So thank you for Josh being able to give answers like that. But yeah, now we get to talk about the Pirates.
Again, breaking the fourth wall. They are playing as of the time of recording this right now, and they are up 6-4 over the Padres in the debut of the City Connect jerseys. Jack Sawinski, Carlos Santana, both homering this game.
About the City Connect jerseys?
By the way, I'm wearing the shirt.
You're wearing the shirt. Okay. How do you feel about the jersey itself, though?
I'll say so. When it first got leaked and I saw it, really wasn't a fan. But I feel like, as is the case, even with jerseys that I'm not huge on, I like it more when I see it on the players, and I liked it more after they kind of zoomed in on them and you could see the intricacies in the pattern and stuff, with the bridges, with the diamonds and stuff like that are kind of incorporating about the city. So it's tough because I feel like a lot of people are either super into them or hate them. I like them, I guess. I don't. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at with it.
I think they're okay.
The helmets stink.
I honestly, I'm not even watching the game, so I haven't seen the helmet. I thought the hat is pretty good. Like the hat, just the normal hat itself, I thought it was okay. The jersey itself, I'm fine with. I think it's a decent design. The only, I guess, critique I would say is what you were talking about with the little details within the jersey with the bridges and the diamonds. I wish that was the entire jersey or none of it. And not just gradient how it is, because it's in the top half of the jersey and then stops part of the way down. I wish it was either all or nothing, and that's my only complaint. But again, I'm just a guy complaining about a jersey on a podcast. So,
yeah.
Do they have that? I'm assuming the shirt that you're wearing that's just a plain yellow shirt. There's no bridges or anything on it because I can't tell in the video.
No. There's some type of pattern going on within the PGH, but it's just dots. It's not what is actually on the jersey or anything.
Yeah, they're not bad though.
Yeah, I think when you look at league-wide, the City Connect jerseys, I was worried because I thought they could have been a lot worse. I think they kind of played it safe, which I'm okay with.
Yeah, I agree.
But okay, talking about the team that is playing in the jerseys, things have continued to not go so well for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and now also T. Brian Hayes has not been seen for a few games now, even with an off day yesterday, wasn't in the lineup today, dealing with some back tightness, which is always kind of seem to be something that lingers with Ke'Bryan. I mean, going back, seasons now, we've seen him be hampered by this on and off. But when you you already are without Brian Reynolds. It's not a very good team to begin with. And now you're talking about missing Brian Hayes from it too. They have put up 6 runs tonight, like I mentioned, but on a game-to-game basis, it's obviously very worrisome to take what's been, I know that he didn't start off well. He's started to, come on here recently. You're probably talking about your 3rd or 4th best bat, at worst 4th, being out of the lineup along with Brian Reynolds. Hard to find the offense within this lineup right now. Sans those two, you're talking about Andrew McCutchen and Henry Davis at this point.
Yeah, and that's just talking about the offense with Hayes as well. You're also talking about missing your best defender. So that's a troublesome for the Pirates if he is going to be out longer term. And like you said, it has been something that's kind of always been a lingering problem with Hayes with these back tightness, and it's a concern for sure. But especially when you're concerned about like winning games and getting this offense out of the slump that they're in, he's one of the consistent ones that you have. And like you said, you really only have Kutch and Henry Davis to bring you a spark offensively right now. And we've said it for several shows, and we sound repetitive, but it's just that baffling to us and to everybody else how a team can go so cold so quick, and it's throughout the entire line.
Everyone. Coming into today's game, so Austin Hedges hit a home run on June 14th. Since that point, him, Sawinski, Bay, and Castro were combined 1 for 101 coming into today's game.
1 for 101.
How's that, like, on accident? How do you not hit better than that?
Yeah. I genuinely don't know. That 1 for 101, that is awful. What does that even equate to with a batting average?
That would be 0.01. I mean, it's not, because 1 for 100 is 1%, so it's less than 1%.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't know, and I don't know if the simple answer is just like, can you blame Andy Haynes and call it good? Because obviously, I don't think he's doing anything as a hitting coach. I think that honestly, right now, he probably couldn't get me to hit better in the Horst Nickel softball tournament. So I think when you look at it from how much is he adding from a coaching value, obviously he's not adding much. Otherwise, you would see some improvements, or not even necessarily see improvements. You wouldn't see such a drop off from everybody. But even despite Andy Haynes and what he brings as a coach, I'm wondering like what it is from a player's, because I know a ton of baseball and throughout sports, not just baseball, but like how you perform can be mental. Is there something mentally that happened in the month of May where they got just demolished by so many teams that could have affected this lineup to the point where they started believing that they are that bad, and now they can't get themselves mentally out of it individually as players? Because
I mean,
I know hitting is probably
major leaguers.
I know. Well, a lot of these guys should be major leaguers anyway. Yeah. Austin Hedges should be sent to Double-A. That he shouldn't be anywhere near the MLB right now, batting like 0.7 on the season. So I or not 0.7. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing if he was batting 700. He's batting like 0.007. But no, the hitting has been such a problem over the past month. Really, like 2 months, or almost, if you're including like all these terrible stretches in May. But I feel like even some of those games in May, they were still getting some runs. They were just getting beat, and it was the pitching that started to tear down. And now,
the biggest shame of all this. Look at the starting pitching they got in that series against the Marlins. They were great.
Yeah, that happens whenever you can't soar. And that's the sad part, is even whenever the team, because we said how bad the starting pitching was and the bullpen has been over the past several weeks, but then when you get quality innings, it doesn't matter if the offense can't score. And it doesn't matter how you could have aces 1 through 5 in your starting rotation. If you can't score 1 run, it won't matter. So that's the problem that the Pirates are running into right now. How do they fix it though? Because clearly, like I said, Andy Haynes not doing anything as a hitting coach. The mentality that he's or the philosophy that he's using towards the hitting, clearly not doing a thing. So what do you do to get out of this slump team wide slump, because you would think that getting players like Hayes back and Brian Reynolds eventually when he comes back, and O'Neal Cruz in the later part of the season, that could help the offense too. But we're not getting O'Neal Cruz until at least like August. So you can't really think about that right now. Yeah. We're in June 27th right now, almost in July. How do you get out of the fix right now? That's the hard part.
Yeah, I don't think that you do. I mean, what you're talking about, I think marginally makes them a better team. I don't think it's enough for them to all of a sudden be in the mix. Also, we talked about the hitting. The bullpen hasn't been good. I know that they're missing some bodies there as well. It seems like you notice when a guy's about to go on the IL almost, because they start to like break down a little bit. It seems like they have multiple consecutive bad outings and then they go on the IL. So hopefully, when they get a guy like Colin Holderman back, who started out the season really well, he's back to that form as opposed to what we had seen right before the IL. Jose Hernandez coming back off the IL when he does. What's up with Moretta? Can they get the early season form of him back? Like, these are questions that marginally I think make them a better team. I don't think that they're as bad as what they've shown lately. But it's kind of like that same conversation we had in May that we're having again. Like, they're not as good as we saw in April. They're not as bad as we saw in May. We're once again having it throughout June with the way that they looked early in June as opposed to now. So, yeah, I think, the additions of Brian Reynolds, Hayes back, if they call up Endy or like I think a guy that no one's really talking about that could definitely help the major league club is Jared Triolo, who can play both corner infield spots. Maybe he could play some outfield as well. Obviously, DH would be a spot too, but they have so many guys that are like Kutch is used primarily as the DH as opposed to playing the outfield these days. So I do think that there are ways for them to marginally get better offensively, but they're still going to have black holes like 6 through 9 on any given night. So I'm out of answers for the 2023 Pirates. Basically,
would you be interested in bringing back Chad Cole in a reliever role?
Yes. I've always wanted. I wish that they would have had that be his permanent home, and I think that he actually pushed back against that. But now at this point in his career, I don't think that he's really in a spot to do that. But I've always felt like that was his best home.
Yeah. I mean, for where the Pirates are at, I feel like that could be an option. It's familiarity with the organization. And you get some new blood in that bullpen. So that would be interesting, just because when we're talking about guys coming up from the minors, they're all position players. Hardly any, like there's only one pitcher right now. And it's a shame because of the Mike Burrows injury. He probably would have been up here by now if we're talking about players from AAA. But Quinn Priester is the only guy who is on the MLB radar when it comes to pitching.
He started
who is ready to come up. So potentially you see him, but it's a shame because we have several position players that we think could come up and contribute right away and help this team right now. Pitching wise, we're still a season or two out from probably most of the help that we're going to be able to see at the MLB level. So it's a shame that all the reinforcements, we basically get no help when it comes to bullpen or really starting pitching. Like I said, Quinn Priester, he could come up at some point over the next month or two, but he's really the only guy.
Paul Skeens.
Imagine
how funny would that be if they draft him?
If they draft him and our arms are like dog water right now. We need you.
Yeah, not as a starter.
Like, listen, we saw you through 120 pitches a month ago. We need you right now.
I mean, listen, I'm still Dylan Cruz, but I'm not going to be upset if that's the route that they go.
And also LSU won the College Baseball World Series.
Dominating fashion.
Yeah.
What a wild game 2. Florida blew them out. Like, it was just.
Yeah. The game 1, it was pretty close. I mean, didn't LSU walk it off?
Yeah.
And they won 4-3, but then game 2, Florida just completely obliterated LSU. Then game 3, LSU ends up winning. And yeah, I saw someone saying that was like one of the worst matchups for a College Baseball World Series that they've had in a while, which I don't know if that's true. I don't follow college baseball enough. But
like in terms of what?
In terms of overall teams, like team talent that could have been there. I have
I
no
mean, I
idea,
think
though.
what I thought was cool about it was the fact that, you had like the top guys going against each other, because you obviously have Cruz and Steens on the LSU side, and then Wyatt Langford, who hit a home run early in that game for Florida, on the other side. So I thought it was like nice to see all those guys, at least from a Pirates perspective. Like, 3 of the names we're talking about as the number 1 pick. Did you see that thing on Twitter, by the way? With our account with our account around the 412, because I put up the poll, right, and I had
I saw people saying, I saw your conversation with Bloop and a Blast, I think, about Langford.
Yeah, but there were some other people saying the same thing. I didn't include him because somebody pointed out an article where it did mention him for the Pirates at 1-1, but I personally hadn't seen it, so I put the 3 names that I had seen for pick 1-1 and then said other. That was all it was. But no, I mean, he's killing it too. I think if you go anything other than Cruz or Steens, you're going under slot, I think, because you want to be able to spend more money throughout the draft. But even so, somebody pointed this out. There's they don't have as high of a, that second pick isn't as high as it normally is for the Pirates. It's like 40 something. So you got to talk about a guy getting through a lot of teams a second time in order to get back to the Pirates to be able to get that guy.
Yeah.
That you're hoping to pay with your second pick, like 40 something, because that's normally the plan. Like, spend down in round 1 and then throw a bunch of money at
you're not going to be able to get a Bubba Chandler this year.
Yeah, right.
So I think they should just pay the slot value. Take Cruz, make it an easy decision. Even if it ends up being the wrong decision, it's still an easy one to justify right now.
Yeah, there you go. It's easy to justify right now. They did make one move for the bullpen. We will see if anything comes of it, acquiring Andre Jackson from the Dodgers. Dodger fans seem pretty excited about it. So,
well,
to get him off the team.
Considering that he currently has a 6.62 ERA in 7 games and 17.2 innings pitched, he's given up 22 hits, 13 runs, all of them earned, 5 home runs, and he's walked 3 guys. His current batting average against is 289. So, I think he fits right in, to be completely honest.
There you go. There it is.
Sick beard, though.
We'll see. Yeah. I like the aesthetic for sure.
I like the aesthetic.
Maybe he's a change of scenery.
Maybe. He's 27. This dude's younger than us. Come on, man. That's so weird that professional athletes are younger than us now.
Hey, 7 years younger than Getzy.
That's true. That's true. Oh, man. All right. Well, hopefully he does. That's it. No Steelers talk this week.
No,
nothing happened
to talk about. I mean, the thing is, we recorded a show on Saturday, so like pretty quick turnaround for us this week. So yeah, nothing to talk about there, but I'm sure there will be next week. So, but a lot of Penguins talk. I would say it's gonna be Penguins heavy again next week. I'm not gonna make any promises. Maybe it makes sense to once again have a guest on to talk about whoever they drafted, as well as whatever they might have done early in free agency. We'll see if that happens. But we'll be back next week. Yeah. Once again, big shout out to Josh Getzoff. This might go down as one of my, favorite episodes that we've done. I'm not going to say number 1. I think that would be putting too much praise on Getzy and too much pressure going forward. But big shout out to him. It was a great conversation. Learning more about him. Obviously, love every time that I get to hear stories about Mike Lange, and obviously somebody that worked so closely with him and then obviously took over and had to try to fill those shoes while making a name for himself. But great conversation. Big shout out to him. You can follow him. I'll put his social media stuff in the description of the show. Also there, you'll find some GoFundMe links and some links to like our friend Haley's, clothing that she's been doing with everything custom designs. A senior at the high school that I graduated from, looking for some help with the senior project. The link to that is in the description as well. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave us a 5-star review wherever you are watching, listening, do all that stuff. Follow us on all social medias. Josh Getzoff kind of already gave us an outro. Teach Barbershop. New and improved at a brand new location. Maybe we should share some photos of that. I'll try to have some and pull them up next time, because boy, is it a far cry from his old location. The the boys moving up in the world. So big shout out to Keeks Barbershop. Has been sponsoring us basically since I think the last 3 years or so. I think since he started the barbershop, really.
Yes, since he created it.
Yeah. So big shout out to
Army.
Christian. big shout out to the Army as well as all the other branches.
That's a throwback if you know what
I
we're
didn't
talking about.
Yeah, I didn't want people to be like, why just the Army? So everybody, all branches of the military, big shout out. Again, shout out to Josh Getzoff. I'm going to play that over and over again as our outro going forward. So, but yeah, I think that's it. Until next week, for Smitty, for Tyler, this has been Around the 412. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.